This is the Wielder of Moonlight build, which is focused around the Darkmoon Greatsword and spellcasting. We'll discuss how to play the build after we look at our equipment and our stat distribution. The weapon itself is nothing game breaking. As we can see, the sword primarily scales with intelligence and requires a 16 strength and 11 dex to use. It's also important to note that it weighs 10. I don't know if that's kg or whatever, but it weighs 10, so we're going to need more endurance than we would normally expect a typical mage build to have. Its weapon skill, Moonlight Greatsword, lets you charge at the blade, giving it more damage and allowing you to accumulate frostbite on enemies. And when you throw off a charged attack in this form, it can fire off against a 10-shot wave. The normal attacks of this weapon are pretty standard. You won't be seeing huge damage numbers from them. The main source of your damage will come from firing off charged attacks. You might be thinking, with intelligence this high, you could probably just go straight into a mage build, but fuck that. In my opinion, melee builds are more fun and more rewarding. And the Darkmoon Greatsword is one of the only weapons that can capitalize on this intelligence stat perfectly. These are the base stats taken from the wiki. We also use the Carrier Knight's Shield. During normal exploration, you'll want some kind of defensive option. Using a shield gives you access to the standard sword and board style of Souls gameplay. The shield is solid. It has 100% physical and 50% magic and faith damage reductions. If you have any other shield you prefer, feel free to use that instead, as long as you don't need to invest a significant amount of additional stats for it. The Carrion Regal Scepter will be our staff that we use to cast our sorceries. It's in my opinion the best staff in the game, with its S scaling in intelligence and high sorcery scaling. The intelligence requirement of 60 means that this is the minimum amount of intelligence we need to aim for. For our armor, we're using the Bandit Mask with Blight's armor set. We have the Godskin Apostle bracelets here because I don't have enough endurance to use it without heavy rolling. But if I had about 25 endurance, then yeah, I would be using the gauntlets as well. This armor just looks fucking amazing, man. Look at it. Holy fuck. And now that I've mentioned my stats a bit, I do want to make it clear that these stats are not optimized at all because I ran out of larval tears. Seriously, make them farmable. So we're using this armor for two reasons. The first is that it looks sexy as fuck. The second is that it gives us a very significant amount of defense. For the late game especially, you want to be tankier. I'm not a fan of glass cannon builds because they require you to play perfectly. Look at how much defense we have here. We can take multiple hits without sweating it. The armor is heavy, so we do need around 25 endurance to have medium rolls. If you wanted to go full mage, I am a fan of the Alberic set. I think it looks sweet. It makes you look like a fucking emperor, but it will compromise your defense stats a bit, so keep that in mind. For our first slot talisman, Radagon Soulseal has pretty much never left this slot since I got it. It's essentially 23 levels as it gives you 5 points in vigor, endurance, strength and dexterity. The trade-off is that you do take 15% more damage, which is a trade well worth making. You can just see how many stats I lose when I take it off. Our second slot is the Dragon's Crest Shield. Extra physical defense is always amazing because pretty much every enemy in the game does physical damage. This one's a no-brainer. For our third slot, we're using the Graven Skull Tally, which gives us 4% extra magical damage. There is a stronger version of this, but you get it much later in the game. It will bring it up to 8%. 4% is kind of negligible, it is a small number, so if you do want to use this slot for another talisman, feel free to. The fourth tally I like using is the Ritual Shield Talisman. It gives us yet another defensive option, but its effects conflict with the Opaline Bubble tier, which we will talk about after. This item takes us from a build that can take a couple of hits to one that's just insanely tanky because it gives us 30% damage reduction on the first hit we take. This is what my base armor looks like, by the way. I didn't realize that the Ritual Shield actually gives you the stats right there on the screen. But like always, these last two slots are utility ones. Use the talismans which you prefer to play with. For our flasks, use whatever ratio you prefer. As this is essentially a magic focused build, you're going to want at least 3 so that you can spam weapon skills and spells to your heart's desire. Our physic combination is pretty standard for our magic damage build. We get a boost in our magic damage from the crack tier and a boost in our defense from the Opaline Bubble tier, which is a one-time damage negation. The effects of the Ritual Shield Talisman and the Opaline Bubble tier do conflict with each other. So what you normally want to do during a boss fight is wait until you take a hit first, which will proc the Ritual Shield by taking you less than max HP. Then you want to take a drink from your physic flask. After that, if you get hit again, heal up, then the Ritual Shield will reset. And now let's look at our sorceries. Comet is our primary single target damage ability. It uses 38 FP, which means that we want up to 120 FP to cast it 3 times consecutively. It pierces enemies and has decent tracking, all around a great spell. Its alternative is the Stars of Ruin. This spell has a higher FP cost of 50, but it hard tracks enemies, so it's perfect for the faster fuckers who you can't lock down. The damage is pretty similar for both spells, so you can use whichever one you prefer, but Comet does have higher burst damage as it can be cast faster. Wielder Of Moonlight is the best spell I currently have. Frankly, this shit is broken. When you use it on bigger enemies, the wave that comes out can hit multiple times as it passes through the enemy's model, leading to ludicrous damage numbers. On top of that, it has a wide horizontal range, making it hard to miss, and it accumulates frostbite on enemies. This is my fucking go-to spell. It is frankly broken because you can rapid cast it as well. The last offensive spell I use is Comet Azure. It's pretty much a Kamehameha. I only ever use it to initiate combat with a stronger enemy because of its long ass cast time, but because you can't move the beam while you're casting it, its applications are very limited. Terra Magicus is a very strong utility spell for adding more burst damage to your rotation. It increases all magic damage by 35%, which lasts up to 2 seconds after leaving the area of effect. And if you haven't noticed by now, it affects the Darkmoon sword as well. Casting it is essentially a time investment you make in the same interval you may decide to heal during a boss fight. Because of this, it's normally better to either cast a spell as soon as you enter the boss's room, or right after they're done with a long attack. Then you want to wait a second for the boss to do whatever they want to do again, dodge into the circle, and then fire off a spell. So let's look at how we're going to distribute our stats for this build. The best starting class to go for, if you want to go for the exact stats I have, is the Astrologer. So firstly, let's start off with 30 Vigor, which is pretty much a baseline health you want to have when you're approaching the mid-level of the game. And like I said earlier, for Comet, we want 120 FP, so at some point you will go for 24 Mind. We want 25 Endurance so we can use Blythe's Armor. If you do not want Blythe's Armor, you can drop the stat heavily. Just work out what the equip load would be for your build. Just remember that a heavy roll is 70% or higher, so keep it below that. All we need is 11 strength, so that the Radagon Sword Seal gives us 16, so we can wield the sword. We have more than enough dex. You need a minimum of 11. Intelligence we want to bring up to at least 60, like I was saying earlier. Faith and Arcane are completely useless stats. That's why Astrologer is also a great class, because they've got the lowest ones amongst the starting classes. So yeah, these are essentially the baseline stats you want to have, and that puts us at level 99. As the game progresses, you want to start getting more damage by raising your int. If you start feeling like your survivability is fucked, go for more vigor. Eventually you're gonna want to hit around 80 intelligence, where you pretty much hit the hard cap for damage numbers. At this point, you are free to do whatever you want with your levels. If you want even more health, go for it. If you want more FP, go for it. If you want to just fucking go ham and just put all your points into intelligence to cap it out, then do it. That's your prerogative. Now let's talk about the general gameplay loop for this build. It's very hard to mix the melee and mage parts synergistically. You may have noticed that the scepter is in my left hand. This is because if you buff the sword and then put it away, you lose the buff. We want to avoid this at all costs because buffing the sword is a huge time investment. Also, it's difficult to use both spells and charge attacks at the same time. They both require the same time investment, so you're normally just choosing between one or the other. So we can either fire a Moonlight Blade Sword or a spell. The Moonlight Wave can stagger bosses after 3 to 4 swings depending on if you fully charge them or not, whereas you'll probably see more raw DPS with the spells. It's a trade-off where you have to decide what option you want to use in every scenario. For example, I'm about to drop a spoiler for a story boss later in the game, by the way, so skip forward now if you want. In the Beast Clergyman boss fight, during the first phase, I pretty much only use melee attacks because he's fast enough to where if I cast a spell, I may not be able to dodge his next attack. Whereas in his second phase, it's the exact opposite. He has longer cooldown periods after each attack, which means that Wielder's Moonblade is a perfect option. This build is a jack of all trades. You can freely switch between the traditional sword and board and mage gameplay easily. I've been using this build in the latter half of the game, in the mountaintop of the giants and onwards. It's been working really well for me. I don't really have any qualms with it other than the fact that the sword is just really slow. But we compensate with that with our armor. If you enjoyed the video and you learned something new, please don't forget to leave a like and comment as well if you want to leave some feedback. If you want to see more content like this in the future, be sure to subscribe. Peace.